Autism in female children generally looks like a more subtle, compliant, socially reciprocal presentation, even if it's not felt that way on the inside, because of the world we live in and the pressures to perform by gender. We all have different expectations. But in the female phenotype, the way this manifests, especially among late diagnosed girls and women, can really be interesting to look at and think back on. Like, oh, what was happening in my childhood? Like, I know why no one saw it because no one was looking for autism in female children or non-binary individuals or really any of the female phenotype qualities. So I thought today's video we'd talk about 13 of the core signs and symptoms of the female phenotype of autism. If you're new here, welcome. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and this has just become a huge special interest for me, so I'm glad you're here. Let's talk, though, about just at the core, autism among females is going to have this more subtle, socially reciprocal, on the outside at least, view to it, right? But beneath the surface, there's a lot more going on. Number one is that actually we are not so great with reciprocity. We're not so great with reading the room, taking turns in conversation, sharing, which I don't think any kid really loves to share if you ask me. But the bottom line is that it's going to present itself where the give and take isn't felt or experienced as easy give and take. It's a performance, it's a demand, it's a I must do, but there's often a lot of struggle with that inside. Like, well, why do I have to share? Like, what's the point of that? This is mine. Number two is friendships that can look typical on the surface, but often do two things. You're often going to look back and realize you either had like a serial monogamy kind of friendship thing where you had one bestie at a time. It was often an intense friendship. It may have appeared just like as two besties, but it was a very emotional and intense relationship for many of us, very absorbing of our entire world, these friendships. And or we were able to be on the periphery of friend groups just enough so it didn't look like we had no friends, but we really weren't feeling seen and understood in the same way. And I would argue that many of us, if we're on the periphery, we're still scanning for the one bestie in many cases. Number three is that often we're going to see, as I've mentioned, a lot of very sophisticated and shaped interests in our special interests. So it might look like horses and Barbies and celebrities and things like that, makeup, fashion, whatever. But beneath that, it's often rigid and intense. We're very immersed in it. And like I've said, the depth and breadth are quite significant. So when you look back now, you're like, oh my God, I was obsessed with this thing, right? Now, it may have been a less socially typical thing, and that would have been more obvious to other people. But if it does fall into, oh, girls like these kinds of things, then it's going to be even less noticed how much you were into that particular interest. Number four is we're often going to see, if we look back, there were a lot more imitated, copied behaviors, right? Whether it was someone's, speech or language, what they look like, how they sounded. You're going to find a lot of mannerisms we, copied from movies or shows or people. And it's really this way to perform being typical, being neurotypical, to be honest with you. And so there's really a lot of scripting going on. At the core, it really is about being this word which is often used for autistic girls, especially in women, which is chameleons or little actors. So a lot of the things we're doing is often really meant to mimic and fit in. And you might look back and go, oh my God, I watched that show, so I talked like that. And all kids copy the certain like hip language of the time, whatever the slang is. But you're going to be doing this really in any social environment. Number five is that the way that you play is often a directed play, and it's more of a controlled and scripted and rehearsed kind of play. And it can often be repetitive, so you reenact the same things over again. But oftentimes when you look back, you were directing the play. Like you were literally directing the actual play, the musical you were acting out, whatever was going on. Not really like living in the moment of the play. There's sort of an intention and a control behind the play. Number six is that as a result of being, trying to fit in and be the good girl or good child or accepted or whatever, you're often fatigued and exhausted and struggling with a lot of internalized depression, anxiety, but not knowing what that is. So maybe you cried a lot. Maybe you had a lot of somatic pains and complaints and headaches and stomach aches and things like that. But your efforts to always do the things you're supposed to do often manifest in mental and physical health symptoms. And now you look back and go, oh, I had a lot of, I missed school a lot. I had a lot of tummy aches, things like that. The next one is a lot of forcing eye contact, faking the things you're supposed to do because you're just supposed to do them. So you might rehearse, once again, social situations, memorize conversations, suppress your stims, not do certain things publicly to fit in. So there's like this intentional, active camouflaging going on very, very young, and you often don't know that you're doing it. You just know what you're not supposed to do, if that makes sense. We also see a lot of autistic girls with the female phenotype being described as shy, as quiet, as well-behaved. We can also see that sort of like bossy, controlling, and I think we can have both, as I've said in other videos. I think privately, you'll see many of them being a lot more in their own homes, very open to what they think or say or feel, but then you leave the house and it's like this, okay, thank you. My mom would always say, like, people would say, oh, she's so well behaved. My mom said she'd be like, my daughter, which is crazy because, like I always said, I'm an only child. Like, I thought I was a really good kid, but I think there was probably a lot of rigidity and emotional things that were challenging. And as a parent, I can appreciate that with her limited skill set, it was even harder. But the point is, there's this mismatch between that. The outside world often sees you that way. Now, you might also be that way at home if you have that more internalized, peaceful, low maintenance kind of version, which many people talk about when they look back at their childhoods. They weren't needy and emotional. But I think more often than not, we're going to see for the female phenotype, like I've said, this mismatch between how we present at home and what the world sees. The next one is, I think a lot of autistic girls and women, and those with the female phenotype, because they've been masking and camouflaging and taking the hit on their bodies and minds to fit in, there's often a big crash out in adolescence. So we all, most people go through an identity thing in, adolescence, and who am I? But I think there can be a much higher risk of substance abuse, of risk-taking, and or of, maybe staying home and not going anywhere. Whatever it is, there's this intensity to the self that has been being pushed down that often plays out in some pretty significant ways in adolescence. And so the mental health stuff we have can look like that's the primary thing, whether it's an eating pathology, self-wounding, significant depression, anxiety, OCD, but you're often going to see at some point, like the volcano, like everything just overflows and explodes as a result of that. Even if it's not necessarily seen by anyone else, it's very intense and often puts us more at risk, especially in those time frames. And then the last few things are the way we bond to others. We often see a lot of, closeness with those who are much older, like adults, or much younger, often to teachers, trying to find ways to be seen, but often difficulty with same age peer groups because of our challenges with the social world and often the lack of diagnosis, not understanding what's happening. So feeling more confident and understood in those who are much older, much younger, things like that. The next one is often having a strong vocabulary, being a big reader, but difficulties with day-to-day pragmatic, conversation, language, taking turns, understanding sarcasm, passive aggressiveness. So on the one hand, there's this very high functioning with the way we internalize language, perhaps, but the way that gets played out in social relationships often creates a lot of, getting feelings hurt, not being understood, things like that. The next one is having our interests and behavior in the world not really play out well with others. And so because our interests are so intense, because we lack reciprocity, because we need to have the sameness or direct the play, these things can interfere more and more with maintaining friendships as we get older. So we know that we can make them sometimes, but really struggle with maintaining friendships and compromising and evolving in that way. And then having the female phenotype often displays a lot more hypervigilance, worry about others' acceptance, people-pleasing, masking, and hiding our distress in ways that aren't seen by others, especially in environments like school, and having a lot of self-criticism and meltdowns. So the way that internalized part is playing out is very harsh for us, even if no one sees it, and often no one does. And so it often plays out in this excessive trying to control and manage our behavior and overthinking. We know that ruminating is extremely common, so we're just always trying to manage all those things I just listed, before, during, and after any social interaction. And so that can further separate us from ourselves and from others, making that late diagnosis look like, oh, you have borderline, oh, you have anxiety, oh, you have trauma, which you may have all those things. But often the root has been driven by by this autistic piece of how our brains work that no one has ever quite seen. So those are 13 core signs. There are so many more. I would add, though, that alongside this is probably going to be more likely a sensory profile of avoidance or seeking in some intense way, right? We just discussed a lot of the social communication challenges, but a lot of dysregulation with your sensory world that you didn't understand why everything has to be a certain way, or why little things bother you, or why, overhead lighting gives you a headache. And so you come across as cranky or inflexible, things like that. So the way our bodies respond to the sensory world and how others interpret that can often be misinterpreted and add to even further lack of understanding for who we are. So I would add that really as number 14, to be honest with you, that the sensory profile has a significant impact on how we manage everything internally and externally, how it's received and perceived in many ways. Feel free to add more. There are so many more, but I think that, when we look back, if you relate to the female phenotype, there's a really good chance that many of these might resonate for you. Thanks for being here. Have a beautiful day. And, I got to show you the kitties. Hold on one second.